In this presentation, we will be focusing on instrumental music of the late Baroque period. During the late Baroque era, instrumental music became as important as vocal music for the first time in history. Great virtuosos such as Bach on the organ or Vivaldi on the violin raised the technique of playing to new heights. Early Baroque composers did not specify instrumentation. Late Baroque composers began to choose instruments according to timbre desired and wrote the music in a way that showcased best quality of the instrument. Instrument designs became more precise and the art of orchestration began to blossom. One dramatic improvement occurred in the construction of string instruments. Some of the finest violins ever built were from the workshops of Stradivarius, Grani, and Amati. Many of these violins are still in circulation and are currently worth millions of dollars. Baroque violin strings were made of gut produced from animal intestines, which yielded a softer yet more penetrating sound than the strings made out of steel that are used today. In the late Baroque era, composers began to use woodwinds on an increasing basis to produce color and tone. At the time, these instruments were all made of wood. Now they can be made from materials ranging from plastic to metal. Horns and trumpets were valveless, called natural instruments, and could only play in one key at a time. Timpani were only occasionally added to the orchestra, serving to furnish a bass sound to the trumpet. In recent times, restored violins and period instruments are used in some orchestras devoted to the performance of 18th century music in order to render authenticity in sound. The suite was a very important instrumental genre in the Baroque era. It is a group of short international dance forms, all in the same key, performed by a variety of instruments. Standard dances in a suite include the Allemande, which was a German dance of quadruple meter and moderate tempo, the Courante, a French dance in triple meter at moderate tempo, the Sarabande, a stately Spanish dance in triple meter, and Jig, an English dance in a lively 6/8 or 6/4. Optional dances might also include the minuet, gavotte, bourrée, and passepede. Repeated sections and binary form movements were ornamented when played for the second time. The suite was such an influential and important Baroque form that many works had several dance-inspired movements, even if not called a suite. Dance-like music tends to have balanced and symmetrical phrases of the same length. Noted composers of suites were Arcangelo Corelli, J.S. Bach, George Philipp Telemann, Francois Couperin, and George Friedrich Handel. Examples of suites by all of these composers can be found through an online search. Bach wrote 4 orchestral suites most likely performed by the Collegium Musicum. Listen to Bach's Suite No. 3 in D major, 4th movement, Bourrée. Handel wrote 2 notable orchestral suites, Water Music and Music for the Royal Fireworks. The water music was played for a royal party on the Thames River in London on July 17, 1717, although this was not the premiere of the work. It was performed without the continuo because it would have been impossible to bring a harpsichord aboard a barge. The 22 numbers of this work are divided into 3 suites and contain lively rhythmic figures and catchy melodies in order to compete with the distractions of an outdoor performance on a river. Listen to Handel's Water Music, Suite in D major a la hornpipe, and Music for the Royal Fireworks. Grand entertainment was the style of the courts of Louis XIV and Louis XV of France. Jean-Joseph Mouret was a musician at the French royal court, serving as a theatrical composer for the Duke of Maine, the son of Louis XIV. Mouret's work included dramatic stage works, including opera ballets and divertissements, meaning entertainments, to accompany plays. He also composed instrumental ensemble suites, which included the Suite to Symphonies composed in 1720. Mouret's Rondo from Suite to Symphonies was written for an orchestra of trumpets, oboes, bassoons, violins, double bass, timpani, and continuo. Listen for a fanfare-like melody and regular phrases with frequent trills. Regular rhythms are in duple meter, punctuated by the timpani. The form is a 5-part structure, A, B, A, C, A, where A serves as a ritornello. Varied dynamics and instrumentation contribute to the musical expression. Listen to Mouret's Suite to Symphonies Rondo. The concerto is a friendly contest or competition between a soloist and an orchestra. The Baroque period places a lot of emphasis on contrast between loud and soft in dynamics and between large and small performing groups. An important orchestral form is based on this contrast. The concerto grosso contrasts a small group of 2 to 4 soloists, called the concertino, against a large group of 8 to 20 musicians, called the tutti, or all. The concerto grosso contrasts not only the texture, but also the tempo and character of the piece within its movements. A typical 3-movement form would consist of the following. 1. A fast movement, vigorous, determined, with clear contrast between the groups. The second, a slow movement, quieter and lyrical. And then third, a fast movement, more lively, carefree, and dance-like. The first and last movements of concerti grossi are often in ritornello form, based on alternation between the tutti and solo groups. A theme, called the ritornello or refrain, is played by the tutti to begin the movement. This theme is played in fragments in different keys throughout the piece, with the entire theme returning at the end. But it is always played by the tutti. The solo sections provide the listener with new melodic ideas, softer dynamics, rapid scales, and broken chords. Antonio Vivaldi, the son of a violinist, grew up in Venice. He was ordained in the church in his 20s and became known as the Red Priest, which was a reference to his hair color. For most of his career, he was a music master at a conservatory in Pieta, which was a school for orphan girls. Most of his works were written for the students there. He was one of the most prolific composers of his era. His output included more than 500 concertos, as well as chamber music, operas, cantatas, an oratorio, and an extended setting of the Gloria. One of Vivaldi's best-known works is La Primavera, Spring, from the Four Seasons, a set of 4 solo concertos for violin, string orchestra, and basso continuo. All 4 concertos use descriptive effects to depict sounds and events associated with the seasons. A sonnet prefaces each concerto, and Vivaldi places lines from the poem into the musical score, so that the effect he intended is absolutely clear. Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons is a concerto grosso for solo violin with string orchestra and continuo, written in 3 movements. The first movement is allegro, evoking birdsong, murmuring streams, thunder, lightning, and is in ritornello form, which alternates new material with a refrain called the ritornello. The ritornello is played by the orchestra multiple times, in fragments, and finally in its entirety at the close of the movement. Listen to Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons, Movement 1. For another example of his concertos outside of the Four Seasons, listen to Vivaldi's Concerto in C major for 2 trumpets, Movement 1. The main keyboard instruments of the Baroque era were the organ, which was used at church and home, the harpsichord, which differs from the piano in that its strings are plucked by quills and it cannot sustain tones, and the clavichord, which produces sound by metal levers exerting pressure on the strings. Keyboard forms of the Baroque fall into 2 basic categories. First are those based on harmony with a strong element of improvisation, such as the prelude, which is a short introductory piece based on improvisation, or the chorale prelude, which is an embellished chorale tune. Other Baroque improvisatory keyboard forms include the passacaglia, which is a series of variations written over a repeating bass line, the chaconne, which is a set of variations based on a repeated harmonic progression, and the toccata, a free, highly virtuosic form such as the one featured in Bach's famous Toccata and Fugue in D minor. The second type are those with stricter forms and based on counterpoint, such as the fugue, which we will look at in more detail in the next few slides. The word fugue is derived from fuga, which is the Latin word for flight. A fugue is a polyphonic composition based on a subject, one main theme. The subject of a fugue serves to unify the work. The different melodic lines are called voices and imitate the subject. 3 to 5 voices are normally a part of the fugue's texture. There is only one feature within the fugue's form that is consistent. All fugues begin with a subject presented in one unaccompanied voice. The subject can begin in any voice. The remaining voices can then imitate the subject in any order. Think about the way that you may have sung Row, Row, Row Your Boat as a round years ago. It is a similar idea to the way that a fugue begins. A fugue may be choral or instrumental. The melodic lines are referred to as voices, regardless of how they are performed. There is normally a continuous flow in a fugue that portrays one mood throughout the work. Fugues can be written as independent pieces or as a movement in a larger work. Often, composers will add a short piece called a prelude to begin an independent fugue. Episodes are interludes between statements of the subjects that serve as areas of relaxation. Other devices possible in a fugue include modulation to foreign keys, the use of contrapuntal devices such as inversion, retrograde, retrograde inversion, augmentation, and diminution, and the use of stretto, where different voices present the theme in close succession. The fugue ends in the tonic key. Here are some illustrations of the different contrapuntal devices that may be present in a fugue. In an inversion, the intervals keep their numeric value but move in the opposite direction. In retrograde, the pitches are stated backward, starting from the last note and proceeding to the first. In retrograde inversion, the pitches are stated backward and the intervals again keep their numeric value but move in the opposite direction. Augmentation is when the melody is presented in longer time values, often twice as slow as the original, or it can be presented with shorter note durations, which is diminution. The opening of a fugue is as follows. The subject is stated alone at the beginning of the fugue in one of the voices. It is then imitated in another voice, which is referred to as the answer, while the first voice goes on to other melodic material. The exposition of the fugue ends when the subject has been presented in all of the voices. As mentioned earlier, episodes are interludes between statements of the subjects that serve as areas of relaxation. Here is an illustration of how the episodes interact with presentations of the subject in the overall form of a fugue. Listen for the subject in box Contrapuntus 1 from the Art of Fugue, which outlines a minor chord. The harmony of this fugue is minor throughout, although it closes on a major chord. The last fugue statement is heard over a long sustained pitch, which is called a pedal point. The texture is imitative, consisting of entries of the same melody. It is in the form of a four-voice fugue for solo keyboard, with an exposition where the subject is presented in the following order: alto, soprano, bass, and then tenor. There are 4 episodes in this fugue which occur between statements of the subject. Listen also to box Little Fugue, which may be more familiar to you. And just for fun and to help you understand the fugue better, find on YouTube the Lady Gaga Fugue. Obviously, the Lady Gaga Fugue is not from the Baroque period, but the more recognizable tune that it is based on may help you to understand all of the fugue components. This is the final presentation in the Baroque module. Make sure to do the readings and other activities within the module.